Hey everybody, John with Vynyly here. So picture this, it's 1983. Elektra Records is about ready to drop the band Dokken. They released their first album, Breakin the Chains, in France, I think in 81. And then they signed with influential up-and-coming management company Q Prime. And Q Prime convinced Elektra to release Breakin the Chains in the United States, where it continued to be a flop. Elektra Records had already had enough. They were going to drop the band, but Q Prime convinced them to let Dokken record one more album. And that album is what we're going to talk about today. The second Dokken album, Tooth and Nail. Now, Tooth and Nail was released, and it was a flop as well at first. But then, in spring of 1985, some magic happened. Dokken, Tooth and Nail. 5 on Friday, here we go. Number 1. The title for this album, Tooth and Nail, is a reflection of how hard the band, and specifically Don Dokken himself, had to fight to get this album made. As I said in the intro, Elektra Records was ready to drop them. And they had to fight and convince them, hey, we've got what it takes. We've got great musicians in this band. Let us make that second album. So they did, and it almost wasn't going to do it. It was critically acclaimed, but it was not a huge selling album at first. But Tooth and Nail is called Tooth and Nail because that's how hard the band had to fight to get this thing made. Number 2, it's no secret that Don Dokken and guitarist George Lynch did not get along very well in this band. And I think at first, a lot of that was blamed on Don because he was the lead singer. The band was named after him, and people just assumed that he was a little bit of a diva because a lot of lead singers are. But it turns out, in hindsight, that it was just difficult for most people to get along with George Lynch. George Lynch is a fantastic guitar player. At the time, doing a little bit of drinking, a lot of drugs, as a lot of people were back then. Not Don, but a lot of other people in the band were. And George was just very difficult to get along with. Even in his own band, Lynch Mob, he went through several lead singers in Lynch Mob because they couldn't work with him. He was very difficult. Now, that combined with the fighting with the label to get this album made at all, it actually is kind of a miracle that this album ever got made. But it did. And here we are. Number 3. If you're like me and you bought this album on cassette back in the early 80s, well, this is not the cover that you got on your cassette. This is the cover that is on the album, obviously. It's also the cover that's on the CD. But both CDs and albums are square. Cassettes obviously are not. If you bought your album on cassette, this is the cover that you likely got. A little bit of a reflection there. Maybe I'll just insert a picture of it. But you can see the two monster hands coming out of the darkness here. And the reason they did that is because they did not like how the cover looked when it was cropped to fit on a rectangle shape versus a square shape. So you might also think this is two different monster hands coming up like this, but it's not. It actually is a mirror image of the inside sleeve. This is the inside sleeve of the album. They took this image and mirrored it, put it on the front cover of the cassette. Number 4. So the band was on tour with Dio in Hawaii when they decided to film a video for the single Just Got Lucky. So guitarist George Lynch, always one with the crazy ideas, decided he wanted to film his guitar solo parts on the top of a volcano. What they didn't know is that volcano had a lot of activity at the time and was actually very close to erupting. Lynch said he could feel the heat through his shoes, and the sulfur and smoke from the active volcano made it difficult for him to breathe. But they got the shots, they finished the shoot, got on the plane, and as they were leaving, the volcano erupted. So they spent some time in the plane circling the volcano to get extra footage for the video shoot. But literally, Lynch was on that volcano just probably hours before it erupted. So I don't want to make a corny joke, but he really did just get lucky. Number 5. So the band was struggling. There was internal strife. The album wasn't selling all that well. But then, in spring of 1985, the miracle happened. The band released Alone Again, which was the ballad on the album. At first, the band did not want to include a ballad on this album. The band as a whole. Dokken did want to include it. And Elektra Records definitely wanted to include it because they knew that's the formula. If you're a hair metal band in the early 80s, you have to have a ballad on your record. Probably because ballads bring girls. I don't know. That's just my theory. But I love ballads too, by the way, so don't get me wrong. Anyway, they released Alone Again. The album sales had been stuck at about 450,000, which wasn't enough. Elektra was drop them again, or drop them, threatened to drop them again, and actually dropped them this time. But Alone Again was released. They released a video for Alone Again, which again was a big thing in the early 80s. And that pushed the album sales up over that 1 million mark, which was huge for the band. It actually helped them survive to then go on and make their third album, which was their huge commercial breakthrough, Under Lock and Key, right? And then after that, it was back to the attack. Both of those albums were huge. And when they became huge, when they became big, that kind of pulled Tooth and Nail up with them. So Tooth and Nail actually kept selling well after Under Lock and Key and Back to the Attack was released. But it all came down to the ballad that Dokken threatened to quit the band over if they did not include. Good decision on Don's part, because that is what got them to that third album, and that really broke the band through.
The quiet side. What's the next song?
The next song is it's an old tune. It's a ballad about being in love. You know, it's a slow song. Jeff and I went to a little studio. Just
You say we had a love affair.
No. This is not true confessions time here. What was the inspiration for this song?
One of Don's love affairs.
All right, let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is Dokken.
And that's it for another 5 on Friday. Hey, if you were entertained at all by this ridiculousness, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, please. It really helps the channel. Hit the notification bell, too, so you'll be notified when new videos drop, which you never know when they're going to be. 5 on Friday, usually, though, typically on Fridays. But you never know when the rest of the stuff is going to go. I've been doing a next week in music history. Been releasing that on Sundays, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, here's the point. Thank you all for watching, and have a great week.